Hello everyone, this is Laraika Laray, and you are tuning in to part 2 of my unhinged Monster Hunter Wilds expansion predictions. In the last video, I covered my predictions and rationale for returning monsters, both with and without an Elder Dragon contingent. Link in the description if you want to watch that video. In this video, I'm going to speculate about what new biomes, monsters, and subspecies and variants we might see for the new cast of critters that populate the Eastlands. This took longer to get out than I expected, and I'm hoping I can finish it off before the title of the expansion drops like this week. Fingers crossed. First, to briefly outline the relevant preliminaries, both Iceborne and Sunbreak's base expansions added in the region of 5 completely new monsters. Iceborne gave us Beotodus, Bambaro, Namiel, Velkana, and Shara Ishvalda. Sunbreak gave us Lunagaron, Garangolm, Malzeno, Geismagorm, and, included here because it was their mainline debut, Espinas. Both expansions also gave us 2 new maps, including one focused on a single type of environment or biome, the Hoarfrost Reach and the Jungle, and another that constituted a multi-biome map, the Guiding Lands and the Citadel, respectively. Finally, the base expansions have included new variants and subspecies for about half of the new roster. Added in the base game. In both, these included the base game's flagship, giving us Ruinina Gigante and Scorned Magnamalo respectively. So these are the general parameters. Let's start some wild speculation. New biome. As stated, both Iceborne and Sunbreak have given us 2 new maps. Of these, one is a single biome map, the Hoarfrost Reach and the Jungle, which serve to flesh out the biome roster of the base game. The other is a multi-biome map, such as the Guiding Lands in World and the Citadel in Rise. These can be both blends of new biomes and blends of biomes that already exist in the base game, and often act as a means to create diverse maps where environments and monsters clash in new ways. Although there are a wide variety of biomes present across the franchise, Wilds already covers many of the bases. On the surface, it has all its core elements covered: lightning, water, fire, and ice. But beyond that, many of the maps in Wilds already possess a multi-biome element. The upper levels of the Oilwell Basin are effectively a swamp, while the lower is a volcano. The Windward Plains contains both desert and savanna. The Ice Shard Cliffs are an urban environment, doubling along with Wyveria as a cave as well as a cliff and a cityscape. The Scarlet Forest, as a rainforest biome, is perhaps the most singular, while Wyveria is at once a cavern, city, and eldritch nest of horrors. Nonetheless, there are biomes missing, so for our single biome, I can see a variety of possibilities. In my mind, the 2 core Monster Hunter biomes that are missing from Wilds are a coastal region and a more temperate mountain range. The wildcard option here is something completely new, like the Coral Highlands and the Vale, although I think the Cliffs and Wyveria fulfill something of the quote-unquote strange environment niche here, although perhaps less successfully. Of these, I do believe a coastal region is probably the most likely. This could be either the actual coast, as mentioned by Eric in the Lagiacrus quest, for example, or alternatively some kind of inland sea or Great Lakes style region further into the Forbidden Lands. I'm going to select the latter of these because, to me at least, it's more interesting to speculate about. Presumably, the travelers from the west already know the general coast, whereas a more inland water body would allow some element of new discovery to take place. In this imagined region, I envision the majority of the map to be comprised of a small archipelago chain, beaches, and ruins. Perhaps something akin to the Burning Coast in Horizon Forbidden West's DLC. The ruins are essential here, in my view, because they also serve as a means of expanding our knowledge of Wyveria. Perhaps, for example, one of them is the remains of a Wyverian research facility linked to the Dragon Torch, and sporting its own small set of guardians suited for its semi-aquatic environment. Guardian green plesioth incoming. The depths of this facility could also provide an arena for specific favoured returners such as Abyssal Lagiacrus, either in the base expansion or in a title update. The coast, meanwhile, would allow for new species of cephalopod or subspecies of the base games, the return of the large carapaceans, plesioth, and other coastal monsters. The inclemency of this area could be linked to the facilities itself, that is, the ruins of Wyveria. Perhaps vast turbines activate and the seas churn, or perhaps Wilk periodically leaks into the sea or the lakes and has had unknown and unexpected impacts on the environment, perhaps causing periodic feeding frenzies of dangerous monsters. This latter point also brings me onto something I would like to see in the expansion. One of Wilds' core themes is about how natural ecologies develop from unnatural origin. The climate of the Eastlands itself is perhaps the most macro-level example of this, whereas Arkveld's arc, from cloned creation back to living, breeding, eating, self-directed de-extinction, is the most direct. I want the expansion to expand on this, but in a different way to the base game. In base Wilds, the ecologies of the regions all developed directly from the after effects of Wyverian technologies, the sand tide, the downpour, the fire spring, etc. The logo of the game also represents its 4 core regions, and due to the diegetic inclusion of this logo within Wyveria itself, we can infer that the 4 regions are directly cultivated aspects of Wyverian civilization. But Wyveria was long dead. As such, I believe that the expansion should have regions whose inclemencies, fallows, and plenties are unintended side effects of Wyverian technology, something not accounted for, but rather emergent from their system errors. A periodic Wilk leakage into the ocean or to a vast lake, for example. Or perhaps a potent thick mist that blankets mountain foothills, resulting from the clash of the fire spring and the frost wind. Which brings me to my second biome, the mountain one, or at least where I place it. One of the coolest things about Wilds' map is you can chart your journey eastwards in a very visual fashion. You can see the ice shard cliffs from the plains during the plenty. You can see the wind's gasp from the dam in the forest. And from atop the cliffs themselves, you can see the entire path of your journey from the west. Plains, the forest, the basin, and the bit you skipped over. This section, here. The forested series of mountain foothills pockmarked by the craters of an ancient war. I personally refer to this area as the Wyverian foothills. I envision this as a kind of temperate rainforest biome combined with mountain foothills and volcanic crater lakes. Sitting between the basin and the cliffs, the foothills are a zone where the hot air rising from the basin clashes with the cold air descending from the cliffs, with the clash of hot and cold air creating a thick mist or fog that blankets the area. This fog creates the environment in which powerful monsters, including this region's apex, emerge to hunt. This could even be a candidate for our multi-biome map, forming a place where volcanic caves around the crater lakes coexist with swampy marshland on the bordering riverbank, and the cold caverns at the base of the cliffs. Such a location lends itself to a diverse roster, as well as a place where monsters more suited to temperate mountains, caves, and forests could dwell. Further, while we bypass it in the base campaign, travelling directly to the cliffs via underground tunnel, the expansion could open up travel to it, perhaps in search of relics from Wyveria's ancient war that lie buried in the craters, or in pursuit of the new flagship. While this region is perhaps less exciting than the coastal region, or a more fanciful one would be, I really like the idea of the expansion continuing Wilds' trajectory of interlinked zones in a manner that organically fleshes out the existing map of the Eastlands. Finally, though, we have our third option, the strange option, our Coral Highlands and Vale. This is not something I really have any concrete thoughts on, although I think if it happens, it will have something to do with the dragon element. The dragon element seems like something that is noticeably absent from the base game's ecology, and I do expect the expansion to rectify this to some degree. Arkveld's capacity to convert elemental into dragon energy serves as a capstone to the other apexes, and cements the base flagship's superiority to them. However, Wyveria, the obvious location for some kind of draconic inclemency, does not add this. Rather than its own zone, I also potentially see a possibility that the expansion brings with it a cycling draconic inclemency, one that impacts all the existing zones differently and uniquely, perhaps bringing out either elder dragons or new powerful invasive monsters such as Rajang or Magnamalo, for example. If we have a multi-biome zone akin to the Guiding Lands, I think this would be the most likely place to integrate a specific draconic inclemency, allowing us to witness its impact on the other biomes but in a more closed and controlled fashion. But this brings me to the monsters themselves, both new monsters and potential variants. As I discussed at the outset of this video, recent expansions have given us 5 new monsters, here including Espinass and Sunbreak as an honorary new addition. These have included both the new Flagship and the new final boss, Velkhana and Shara Ishvalda and Malzeno and Geismagor, respectively. We may also get a new monster in the title update, such as Safijiva, but I'm working here with the base roster for the expansion. I think, given how base Wilds went, it's impossible to really speculate about what the title update specifically could bring us. The final boss is most likely going to be an Elder Dragon. This is based on precedent. It could be a construct based on one or several elders, much like Zoshia was, but this is functionally the same thing. Either way, I expect it to be a mystery and a surprise. Wilds G's flagships could really be anything. I recently saw a post that suggested that since Wilds loves 4 and 4U, and 4U had a flying Woven flagship in Seregios, that Wilds would follow 4 in having a demi-elder like Gore. I do not know if I completely agree with this, but I do think it would be exceptionally fun and like a really interesting callback to earlier entries in the franchise. Demi-Elder as a category was also only formally introduced in Wilds, freeing Gore from its imprisonment in the question mark category that is now occupied by Omega Planetes. Fleshing out the Demi-Elder category in the expansion would be, I think, a great way to pay homage to 4, but also to build on Wilds' commitment to natural/unnatural ecology. Demi-Elders are, after all, perhaps the most explicable Elder Dragons in many ways, with more evident life cycles and less supernatural capacities, even if Gore is somewhat of a freak of nature. In fact, one potentially interesting direction I could imagine taking this, and I am wildly speculating here, what if Zoshia itself follows Arkveld's footsteps and, by metabolizing the Frenzy virus and its antibodies through the Dragon Torch introduced in High Rank, evolves itself into a new Demi-Elder, and then, at the expansion's climax, into a wholly new Elder, a kind of white angelic Fatalis Megala, wholly its own being. Given that Gore reproduces by infecting other monsters with the Frenzy virus and then either transforming into itself or bursting forth from their bodies like some kind of chest burster, I could even see Zoshia giving birth, perhaps, to this Demi-Elder version of itself. One thing I will say here is that I would like the flagship to be a Demi-Elder at most. I would prefer it if ultimately it was closer to the other Apex monsters. Something potent, but ultimately explicable. And in this, I think it could be anything. A Neopteran or Snake Wyvern would be novel, or even another Cephalopod, another new category introduced in Wilds. Either way, though, I am sure it would be fantastic, and I hope it's handled as thematically well as Arkveld herself. Setting aside the flagship and the new final boss, whatever they may be, that leaves us with 3 totally new monsters. Or 2 and a Frontier Returner if Sunbreak's pattern holds, hoping for you, Tycoon Zamuza. One of these monsters will be the apex of a new single biome map. I am fairly confident in predicting. The base game has, including Arkveld as honorary apex of Wyveria, 2 flying wyverns, 2 leviathans, and a cephalopod. The new apex could be another cephalopod to even out the numbers, but I would prefer it if they used the opportunity to diversify the apex tier monsters slightly more. Give us a fanged beast, or a fanged wyvern for example, or a bird wyvern that is properly bird-like, or even a new brute wyvern. Given that Wilds already has really novel brutes such as Rompopolo and Chematries, if we get a dedicated multi-biome map alongside the single biome map, which I am expecting, I do not really expect this to have an apex in the same way as the other maps. Or at the very least, I expect its apex to be the new flagship, whatever form they take. I also think it's possible that one apex will be a powerful returning monster. If we actually get 2 single biome maps, or at least as single biome as Wilds comes, we could also get 2 new apex monsters. I don't think it's the most likely possibility, but it is a possibility. It should be noted that there's no definitive hierarchy or placement for the new G-rank monsters. Sunbreak gave us Espinas and the 3 Lords of the Citadel, all monsters that sit in the upper echelons of their respective biomes. Iceborne, meanwhile, gave us Namiel and Valkana, to be sure, fleshing out the existing Elder Dragon roster, but it also gave us Beatodus and Banbaro, monsters who existed to mostly set the scene and flesh out the ecology of the Hoarfrost Reach, although Banbaro then went on to show up literally everywhere. I really hope that doesn't happen again. Will Wilds G give us a new Beatodus and a Banbaro, or a new Lunagaron and Garangolm? Remains to be seen. But what would I personally like to see? A new Snake Wyvern is a possibility. And I say this primarily because it would also allow Najarala to come back. As I mentioned in my Returners predictions, I cannot see the devs dedicating resources to bring back Najarala alone. The skeleton requires a bit too much work. However, if it's returning alongside an entirely new Snake Wyvern, whether as Apex, Flagship, or mid-tier layabout, I see the resource cost being far more justifiable. A third cephalopod would also be wonderful, although given I believe one or both of the others is likely to get a subspecies, as I discussed below, I think this is less likely. Although, maybe double up with Demi-Elder category and give us a larval form of Nikakos, or Yamatsukami. Honestly though, what I really want to see, more than anything else, is a new Neopteran. But specifically, a new Mantid. Currently, the only Mantis-based Neopteran is Atokar, and no complaints there, she is queen. But getting a second one would be really exciting. Mantids are known for excellent camouflage, and including one as a kind of ambush predator who mimics or mirrors the environment it's found in, or indeed other monsters, would be really interesting to see. Give us a kind of reverse Astalos. A Neopteran that looks like a wyvern, rather than a wyvern that looks like a Neopteran. In general, however, what I chiefly want to see from the expansion's completely new additions to the franchise is for it to continue the diversification of Wild's already robust and diverse roster. We have a great array of fanged beasts, flying wyverns, leviathans, brute wyverns, and temnocerans. Give us a second amphibian, a new Piscine wyvern, a new Neopteran or Carapacian. Build out the roster to even greater heights. I love the newcomers in Wilds, and I am low-key excited more for the newcomers in G-Rank than I am for the returners. And speaking of those existing newcomers to the franchise, which of those could we expect to get a new coat of paint? Subspecies and variant. The base roster of Wilds gives us 15 completely new monsters, excluding the duplicate guardians. Chatacabra, Chematries, Lalabarina, Balahara, Doshaguma, Rompopolo, Ajarakan, Hirobami, Shei-Wu, Raydal, Uthduna, Nu Udra, Jindahad, Arkveld, and finally, Zoshia. Based on precedent, that is, looking at Iceborne and Sunbreak, we can expect roughly half of these, that is somewhere between 6 and 8, to get some form of alternate form, whether that be as a subspecies, a variant, a rare species, or a deviant. Although only half of the large monsters will get this treatment, I'm going to try and give most of them the benefit of the doubt and tackle them in order. Of course, these are my own thoughts and projections. I'd love to hear your own in the comments. So starting with Chupacabra. Chupacabra is in a bit of a weird space. Starter monsters historically almost never get subspecies or variants in a G-rank expansion. The one primary exception to this is Celtus, with its desert subspecies. However, Celtus is also a special case in that it is tied with Celtus Queen, and received its subspecies alongside and in combination with that queen. However, Celtus was also the starting monster in Monster Hunter 4, and it also the only starter monster besides Chupacabra that is not some form of raptorial bird wyvern, or, in the case of Great Jagras, its New World equivalent. So maybe he has a chance, slim as it may be. That said, unless there is a giant Mama Cabra out there for it to ride around on, I do suspect its chances are slim. And that would also fit more into the new monster category. That said, bring on the Mama Cabra. Mama Cabra for Wilds G-Rank, you heard it here first. Chematries. Our favourite flaming chicken dinosaur. Chematries is an early game monster who could be taken in a few directions. While you can encounter its tempered form in the ruins of Wyveria, Chematries feels very much based in the plains, with its abilities designed to show off that fact. You fight it first in the fallow, for example, where its fire scorches huge swathes of the dried grass. But let's imagine it a bit otherwise. Ecologically, Chematries' flames are produced from a combination of friction and its natural oils. That is, the Chematries igniter that it drops when you defeat it. As a monster, its design in its name also draws heavily on the legend of the cockatrice or the basilisk, a rooster hatched by a toad or a snake whose gaze brought death. Given this, I can envision a subspecies whose oil has transformed into some kind of deadly toxin, perhaps causing both poison and paralysis, in order to immobilize and consume prey. This runs counter to the base species' life as a more dedicated scavenger, but could work in a different environment in which the animal is forced to hunt, perhaps one of the new biomes. That said, a poisonous bird-like brute wyvern perhaps treads too heavily on Rapopolo's claws, and gives the same issue that bringing back Shrouded Nursilla would for Lalabarina. Speaking of which, Lalabarina. Lalabarina is a monster whose directions could go in a wide variety of ways, and it's the one that, for me at least, a new subspecies in G-Rank is, I think, almost inevitable. Although it belongs to the spider-like Temnoceran genus, Lalabarina's morphology actually draws heavily on the velvet ant, which is a wasp, with its stinger, its mandibles, its compound eyes, and its fluffy coating. With the base species' abdomen modelled on the rose, it's easy to imagine a version in another biome who takes after a different flower with different abilities, or perhaps simply a different colour of rose. Given the connection to the ballerina, I could see a kind of black swan Lalabarina with a deep black rose. That said, I do see two primary directions for Lalabarina as a subspecies, speccing either into a new status effect, or to an elemental attack. Of the statuses, the one I can most readily imagine is Blast, although this steps a bit too closely towards Pyarachna Kadaki. Many insects are known to produce volatile chemicals for self-defense, and Lalabarina could utilize these to create exploding florets that rain down on its prey. Alternatively, I could see it going the elemental route, perhaps producing flammable excretions in a fire variant, or even feasting on dracophage bugs to develop a second-hand dragon element. I think that would be especially exciting. Regardless of what the developers choose, though, Lalabarina is one that I am excited to see what they cook up. Balahara. While not a fan of fave for many, Balahara is a monster I can actually quite easily see a variant for in the expansion. Less so a subspecies, unless it fits nicely into one of the new biomes. If we get a beach biome, Bobbitworm Balahara incoming for sure. Speaking of the existing monster, however, Balahara coats itself in fulgurite as it swims through the deserts of the plains, which make up a key portion of its existing armor. Given this, I think a variant that uses this fulgurite to generate electrical attacks through friction is fairly probable. This Balahara could be larger, perhaps even slower, with modified plating that increases friction to generate static. It could even fulfill a role of alpha in small Balahara packs. Alternatively, one that has even more developed gunk that causes defense down, akin to acidic glavenus. Regardless, I think the route for a Balahara variant is as a kind of alpha individual who has corralled the smaller, standard Balahara into its troop. Doshaguma already has a guardian form. Moving on. Rompopa. Okay, but seriously. I do think Doshaguma can be considered to have already received the equivalent of a variant or a subspecies in its guardian form. Guardian Doshaguma fights quite differently, with a new set of moves and interactions, and a loss of the pack dynamic. As a result, I think it's unlikely that Doshaguma will get one of the coveted slots in the expansion. I think if anything, it's more probable that its skeleton could be reused for a new bear-like fanged beast. It will be used to flesh out one of the new biomes. There's also the weird side note that no bear-like fanged beast has ever received a dedicated variant or subspecies. Snow Baron Lagombi and Red Helm Arzuros are deviants, and Apex Arzuros might as well be. If anything, Doshaguma is already ahead of its peers in this regard, but if it does get a variant, I expect it to be in line with these. More aggressive, perhaps even berserk, and a threat to anything that comes close. Rompopolo. Like Lalabarina, Rompopolo is a monster I can easily imagine getting a dedicated subspecies or variant. Its presence in the base game feels like it really could be more than it is. Rompopolo stores gas in its sacs and expels it to cause both poison and explosions. This, I feel, serves as a solid basis for either a variant, whose poison is more deadly or gas more explosive, or a subspecies that utilizes its gas in a radically different way, perhaps akin to Coral Puke Puke, which has evolved its gas sacs as stores of more pressurized liquids, and gases that can be fired at range. Alternatively, going in a very different direction, one could imagine a Rompopolo that has sworn off its gas abilities entirely in favor of more evolved sickle-like forearms, perhaps to become a more voracious predator and frontal combatant. It's easy to forget that Rompopolo is one of very few brute wyverns with anything but very residual forelimbs, and it would be really interesting to see this built upon in a subspecies or variant. Consider this a kind of slashing-oriented Brachydios, attacking with beak and scythe, backed up maybe by some residual explosive and poisonous gases. I believe. Ajarakan. Ajarakan feels kind of perfect as is to me. While I can imagine a variant that is permanently superheated or whose carapace has developed to be even tougher, the mid-tier equivalent of a furious Rajang, or a subspecies that makes use of a distinct or different element, they all feel to me quite lacking compared to the original. The only natural development I can see is a lightning variant. Call it Dynamo Ajarakan, which uses magnetic minerals attached to its carapace and its spinning attacks to whir up and generate charge like, well, a dynamo. This would, I think, be pretty cool. One slightly funny observation I made while writing this video is that the fanged beasts have a, shall we say, discrepancy when it comes to subspecies or variant distribution. That is, essentially, every monkey fanged beast has a common variant or subspecies, and essentially none of the non-monkey fanged beasts do. Don't believe me? Here we go. Kongolala, Emerald Kongolala, Blangonga, Copper Blangonga, Quechuacha, Ash Quechuacha, Bishaten, Blood Orange Bishaten, Rajang, Furious Rajang. Other fanged beasts only come in two varieties: Total Normie or Absolute Sicko. Bulldrome, complete normie. Volvodon, also a complete normie, unless you count one of the online spin-offs. Gammoth, Elderfrost Gammoth, sicko. Arzuros, Red Helm and Apex Arzuros, sicko twice over. Lagombi, Snow Baron Lagombi, sicko by technicality. It is Lagombi after all. Goss Harag, sicko masquerading as a normie, a bit like Hannibal Lecter. Garangolm is the rare case of a total normie monkey, but since it was only introduced in Sunbreak, I expect its state-mandated subspecies or variant somewhere in the next gen. And given Doshagama's sole variant is a clone created by ancient technology, it probably counts as an honorary sicko here. Anyway, this means the pattern dictates that Ajarakan is 90% getting a variant or subspecies. We will have to see. And also, to backtrack slightly, Doshagama now has a 50% chance of getting some endgame raging challenge deviant form, and a 50% chance of getting absolutely nothing ever again. Hirobami. Hirobami is the kind of monster I also don't really see getting a subspecies, unless it fits really neatly into one of the new biomes. Situating it on the Ice Shard Cliffs more or less exclusively, I could potentially see a Shrieking Legiana-style variant, akin to the Balahara variant I hypothesized above, a kind of alpha individual to expand the pack dynamics further. That said, Hirobami is probably the one monster whose current pack dynamics actually work, in that it feels reasonable to fight as a group. Unlike Doshagama packs, which are charitably framed, a cluster, Hirobami takes turns to attack you. They swoop in, attack, give space, and attack from range. They feel designed and manageable. If anything, they kind of feel like they could get a G-rank aggression update, but are most likely to languish a bit in high rank. I am happy to be surprised here, because Hirobami has one of my favourite designs in Wilds, and one of my least favourite fights. Shaywu. Before we move on to the apexes and the flagship, let us consider the apex who is not an apex. Shaywu feels ripe for a subspecies. The integration of Shaywu into the narrative of Wilds highlights its role as a predator of Guardian. But what was this species like before it moved into its current niche as pseudo-apex of Wyveria? Where did it even live? I think the subspecies for Shaywu will be closer to an original species, native most probably to whatever new biome we visit, making it one of those small handful of monsters like Red Kezu, where the subspecies is actually the base species, and the base species is the derived or deviated form. If Shaywu adapted its current assassin capacities to prey on the nutrient-rich guardians, this more ancestral Shaywu could be quite different. It could be larger and more direct, using size to overwhelm armored prey, such as maybe the Carapacians. Or perhaps it could be smaller and quasi-pack oriented. Something like the Humboldt squid, where it hunts in loose groups and preys on each other and anything else of suitable size. The nutrient-rich Wyveria would have then provided an arena for more specialization against potent but nutritious prey. Either way, this subspecies will almost definitely go in one of the new biomes. And that's all for the normie large monsters. So let's talk about the final batch, the flagship, and the Forbidden Four, and Zoshia. Arkveld. Arkveld is inevitably going to get a variant, possibly a subspecies, but more likely a variant. I say this because both Nergigante and Magnamalo received variants in their respective expansions, and in line with those, the safest bet is an Arkveld but more. I could also see a more direct canonization of Arkveld Unleashed, its Arc-Tempered form, which also cycles back and gives us a return to the Guardian variant. Arkveld in this way might not even get a true new variant, but we shall see. Another possibility, one unlikely but feasible, at least in my mind, is that as part of the expansion we discover a relict population of original Arkveld. Ones not brought back from extinction, like our current queen, but rather ones that continued to evolve along an adjacent but distinct trajectory in the wild. Theme and lore-wise, I like this less, but I think it has the potential to give us a much more interesting Arkveld subspecies that is meaningfully different from the base game. That said, if this does happen, I hope that Arkveld Unleashed forms the basis for G-rank normal Arkveld. And to quickly address Zoshia here, I do think our base game final boss is bound to get some kind of upgrade, hence my Demi-Elder hypothesis above, although I think that is a long shot. However, I expect this to be either in the form of one of the new monsters, such as, say, the new final boss or Flagship, or in a title update a la Safi'jiiva. Regardless, I think they have to do something with Zosia. Unlike Xeno'jiiva and Zora Magdaros in World, for whom the rematches that we have with them are, at best, non-canonical retellings of the events for the sake of gameplay, Zosia gets a dedicated quest that reveals it to be an endlessly regenerating monstrosity, so long as the Dragon Torch exists, or some other equivalent source of power. Whatever happens with the Dragon Torch in the expansion is tied to whatever form Zosia will be likely to take. With that out of the way, let's look at the Forbidden Four. A big question here for me is, do we think all of the apexes are going to get variants or subspecies? My thought here is actually no, because the arc-tempered versions already fulfill a lot of the ground that a variant would. I expect the arc-tempered movesets to be incorporated directly into the Master Rank versions, likely with some additions. I can see maybe 2 of them getting dedicated new forms. This is especially the case given that we are only likely to get about 7 or 8 new variants and subspecies in total, and I would really like them to flesh out the middle of the roster, rather than straight up replacing the apexes a la Black Veil Valhazak, but times 4. That said, let's consider what forms, variants, or subspecies of the Forbidden Four could take. Jin'dahad. Malfunctioning Jin'dahad. The apex I actually see most likely to get a variant or subspecies in Wild's G rank is Jin'dahad. In terms of in-universe ecology, Jin'dahad operates by absorbing heat through its lower body, primarily its claws and chest spike, and then venting it from the plates on its back. The reason things freeze is partly due to the ambient temperatures on the ice-shard cliffs, which may also be why Jin lives there, and due to the surrounding heat being drawn into Jin'dahad's body. As an exceptionally large monster, it needs a way to properly vent heat, and this is likely why it doesn't make use of its nuke or many of its ice powers once you break the plates. Doing so would cause it to massively overheat. But what if it did massively overheat? Malfunctioning Jin'dahad, in my mind, is a very obvious variant form, or perhaps even a subspecies, which controls both heat and cold. One whose thermal plating has either been damaged or which has developed in an errant fashion due to some congenital defect or the wounds of battle. I see this form of Jin as akin to a Shah de Lamadeur, which oscillates between hot and cold forms. New Udra. Venomous New Udra. While New Udra capitalizes on being the giant flaming land kraken that she is, the octopus branch of cephalopods is rich and diverse, and one of the most iconic is the blue-ringed octopus, famed for being one of the most venomous creatures one is likely to encounter along coastal regions. Unlike Jin'dahad, which I see as an apex monster, I actually think it would be interesting if the subspecies of New Udra actually shed its apex status and was more of a mid-tier threat in the new biome, or as an invasive species in the Scarlet Forest, or both. The venomous New Udra that I envision here is smaller than its cousin, but trades weighty blows for highly toxic venom, inflicting the hunter with poison and deadly poison. Its appearance could evoke the iconic blue rings of the blue-ringed octopus, or something similarly as garish, while the oil mucus could be replaced by severe toxins exuded from the skin. Uthduna. Insert status effect here, Uthduna. Similarly to my hypothetical New Udra variant, this subspecies of Uthduna is smaller and a bit slimmer in my mind than its apex counterpart, trading its enormous bulk for swifter movements and an array of status effects. These could include both paralysis and blast, resulting from an electrical organ akin to the electric eel that is turned dormant in the larger normal Uthdunas, or blast-like secretions that both inhibit prey and create environmental hazards. Perhaps these elements could also derive from dietary elements, such as feasting on paratoads and blastoids, akin to how Mizutsune develops its soul seer abilities from the consumption of blast arowana. Shattered Raydao. Raydao is, at least for me, very different to imagine a natural subspecies for. It is perfectly attuned to the sand tide and the electricity it brings. I cannot really envision an evolution of that is more perfect than the one already present in the arc-tempered form, in which the fulgurite crystals trail lightning in their wake. Shattered Ray Dow builds on the concept of tempered and arc-tempered ray, coming closer perhaps to a deviant form like Bloodbath Diablos. Its bolt horns are broken and malformed, leading it to appear scarred by its own lightning. Its scales are jagged and torn, perhaps causing bleed to the hunter, and unlike the precise railgun strikes of normal Ray Dow, the shattered variant fires lightning like a shotgun, peppering the environment both with lightning and with fragments of its own carapace dislodged from the blast. It is a variant that is angry and in pain, and fights like it. Gone are the graceful, almost bored swoops of its normal species. Shattered Ray Dow is frenetic, fighting in a rapid, aggressive, and rage-fueled burst. Looking at a potential variant of Ray Dow like this that is more close to a deviant also brings me on to deviants more broadly. One of, in my opinion, the coolest elements, both ecologically and mechanically in Wilds, was how Mizutsune developed soul-seer abilities when its head was broken. If anything, I hope that deviant-style behavior makes more of a comeback in the expansion, perhaps here tied to environmental crises brought on by effects to the Dragon Torch. This should be a fantastic way, in my opinion, to extend the current apexes in natural ways that build on their arc-tempered states without giving them nonsense subspecies, even if I have outlined a few here. This could also lay the groundwork for other large monsters to bring back deviant forms explicitly, or to integrate deviant movesets and ecology into both existing monsters and returners alike. The Dread Wraths, for example. Either way, one of my biggest fears for the expansion is that it will forget the Apex monsters. This feels likely, but they are really iconic, and I feel they deserve a continued place in Wilds' world-building and gameplay loops as it continues and concludes over the next couple of years. Anyway, these are my predictions. Here on the eve of the expansion's formal announcement, 2 new biomes, 5 new monsters, 7 to 8 new variants or subspecies, likely +1 for a returner that is far too broad to speculate about here, although if it's one of the base game, I suggest Nursilla, using the skin of an entirely new monster that is neither Kezu nor Gypsaros. Regardless, I'm really excited about Wilds expansion, and the title updates to follow. I hope we get all 5 title updates this time. I'll really be tuning in this week, so hopefully see the announcement at Summer Games Fest. Although if it's not there, I expect it to come relatively soon. Regardless, if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe and leave a comment. I really want to listen to your feedback and your thoughts and desires and dreams. I post videos about my favourite franchises when I have time to here. This has been Laraika Laray, signing off.
More than I can give. I tried to touch its cosmic sheen, but today all I smell is chlorine. Yesterday I was deep sea diving, but today